It's almost like you'll see regular people sized, and then you'll see people that were much larger around those regular sized people, and they were adorned in all of these beautiful gowns and things. And they would have a little bit smaller head to their body, as far as the size. It wouldn't be proportioned like ours is. And you'll see a lot of times in these paintings halos over them. And it makes you wonder if that's what we were left with. We couldn't be left with photos because then we'd know it happened. And it was some different kinds of technologies that seem to have been going on that we don't use today. Everything seemed to have ramped up in around the 1880s, and they call it the years of the Enlightenment, where we started to get ingenuity and started to get back into science, is what they say. But before that, they called it the Dark Ages, and people loved Christ, but they were dying of plagues and bloodletting and doing all these weird things. But I believe that it's the opposite, and it was the Golden Age. And all the stuff that ramped up was because it was a worldwide catastrophe. A lot of people call it the mud flood that happened between 1776 and 1812. That maybe a comet or something came through and it caused the sound and the pressure of this comet, caused the dirt to mix with the water underneath the dirt, and everything sunk. Anything heavy on the earth sunk about between, just a few feet to up to 30 feet or 20 meters. So you'll find all these old structures that are sunk in the mud, and you'll see windows and doors and things going into the ground. You'll see some of them were dug out. Some of them have doors going into second floor windows. And then you'll find that fireplaces were some other technology. They weren't closed off. They were not used for burning wood, but they were like to disperse electricity or something. You'll find there weren't many kitchens out of all of these structures built, tens of millions of them all over the earth that we can't build today. They had no bathrooms, or they may have one bathroom, or they had no kitchens, or they may have one kitchen. Almost like maybe the regular people that made it through the tribulation somehow, or that were here with the saints during the rule and reign, they had to use the restroom, maybe. But it just seems as if people didn't have to eat to survive. They had in their glorified bodies, these saints, they could eat just for pleasure, but they didn't have to have a kitchen everywhere because they had to eat. And they had no bathrooms. But during 33 AD, the Romans knew how to clean water and make bathrooms. But you'll find 1830s to the 1840s, they had the great stink over all the earth, where people were dying of cholera because there was no bathrooms. But they had these magnificent buildings, and there was quite a disconnect. They'll have all these structures, and they'll say a lot of them were built in the 1800s or the early 1900s. And then you'll find this Greco-Roman Gothic cathedral, mosques, castles, and all these onion dome structures and Capitol buildings and things, and they'll say that they're replicas, but they are exactly like the stuff from Rome or anywhere else. You'll find the New York Stock Exchange, or they're all over America and the New World, so to speak. And then to say that we didn't find America until 1492 is kind of awkward and odd. What they had is a bunch of children. It seems first it was empty cities around 1830, 40, 50, and they were taking photos of these full-on cities that were made for millions of people. There were Greco-Roman Gothic cathedral, all this beautiful architecture, and there was no people. They looked like they were sunk in the mud and mud flooded out. There was not much infrastructure because it got covered up. They didn't find any dead bodies, so I believe that at the end of the Millennial Kingdom, the saints went to the North Pole, but the rest of the people at the end of the kingdom, they got raptured. I believe they got raptured. And then the catastrophe occurred. There's a lot of cities that have underground first floor streets and everything because they sunk that far, is the theory. And they'll find them later, and then they'll put a fake narrative to it, like they had to raise the city or something. But what's odd is they could build these ginormous buildings. They had no technology, right? So the historical narrative is they had no technology. The mud flood connected California from an island to the mainland, in my opinion, as this catastrophe that caused the liquefaction, which is everything sunk, and then it solidified as it dried. And then I believe the Dust Bowl occurred in America in regards to that as well. And everything seems to have been dug out around that time. You'll see the photos in the 1840s and 50s, 60s, 70s, almost as if they're opening city to city and letting people back in. But what you'll find in the very beginning is just a few people that looked very stoic, and there was a bunch of children. A few people and a bunch of children. And I believe they were the fallen ones that got loosed with the enemy. And they looked like us, but they're not us. So they were the rulership that came back in a little season. And I believe that the catastrophe occurred when the enemy was loosed. He came up out of the ground, out of the abyss, as hell is under the earth. So when he came up, he caused the liquefaction. He was the comet, so to speak, and there is a firmament above us. So he would come out of the ground, and then that sound and pressure was from him inside the dome. That's my opinion of it. But it also caused earthquakes and volcanoes to occur, and mudslides and flooding, because a lot of lakes and things that were being protected by walls of dirt, they liquefied. Some people believe in the Grand Canyon was a big lake the size of several states, and it was it was a wall of dirt that was keeping it locked in. And when the mud flood occurred, it let loose, and that added to why the Grand Canyon is the way it is. I don't know. It's just theory. Or like Venice is underwater because the water rose and it became underwater, or New Orleans is underwater and they had to build levees. You'll find in old maps there's no ice and snow for 1,000 years until around 1812, and you'll find retrofitted fireplaces on the sides of cathedrals, things from Russia all the way to America. They were built from the outside, and they were different constructors, you could tell. They started to have these World's Fairs and build bathrooms and kitchens as needed. But this old group of people somehow had built sewage for like water runoff. But they didn't think to build bathrooms with these glorious buildings. They built these tall, tall ceilings, but they were supposed to be really broke back then. And they had a bunch of these World's Fairs, and these World's Fairs, we think they were ways for them to indoctrinate us to this new world we were coming back to. So you ask, where did the people come from? Where did our ancestors come from? Well, they seems like in the 1800s they were coming out of Cabbage Patch Kid. They were called Cabbage Patch Kids. Came from an old historical narrative that live babies were coming out of cabbage patches, and they were sent to do adult jobs. If you look in the old pictures, because they had to ramp up these facilities and clean them up, but they didn't have any adult people, so they had to use children. And there was nothing but orphanages and insane asylums all over the earth around that time. There was incubators, and they were made by some weird guy who claimed to be a doctor, but he wasn't. And you'll find that they were in carnivals, and you could look at live babies in carnivals, and they had a lot of people adopting babies, and there's thousands of postcards that explain this. The first movie was a lady pulling babies out of live babies out of cabbage patches in the 1890s. I believe it's possible the adult fallen ones were posted up in different countries so they could speak any language, so they could teach us culture, like a cult. They could speak any language, and they taught us different things, and we came up, or our ancestors came up, believing this was the way it was, or whatever. In the 1800s, almost every city in the world seemed to have burned down, almost like they got hit with some deep impact weapon, because it was like everything was made of stone and granite and cement. You'll see pictures of, in our historical narrative, it'll talk about marble melting. It got so hot. But they had to get rid of a lot of these structures, and then we had major wars that destroyed a lot of them as well through carpet bombing, because they had to get rid of this stuff, or we were going to eventually know that we didn't build it, and it was built for gigantic people. So the center of the earth is the North Pole of the flat earth, and if the camp of the saints are there, they're ready to be engulfed by the rest of the world, because they already are. Biblical narrative is there'll be a war against the saints, and God will stop it. It's called the War of Gog and Magog.